This Sunday is unusual because we have so much to think about and reflect on, listen to and hear and see. And so thank you to our musicians for giving us this special insight into the day that the heavens wept while the earth pretended like things were just going on as they always had. Because this day has a longer reading and we have more special music, my remarks to you today will be more brief than usual. But I do want to offer something that will help us consider more of where we're going on this Holy Week together. You may know the British author George Orwell, who wrote 1984. He became very famous for warning people against a kind of authoritarian surveillance state. But when he was a younger man, he wrote a very short story about his experience in Burma of going to a public execution, going to a hanging. And he describes it in a very matter-of-fact manner, very much like the people who must have seen Jesus on that day in Jerusalem. He talks about how it was that the commander of the British garrison was a little frustrated because things were a little behind with the execution, and until we execute this guy and hang him, we can't have breakfast, so let's get on with it so we can eat, after all. George Orwell follows the prisoner from his cell, and a wild dog gets into the courtyard, and they have to chase it around because you can't just have a dog. The dog wants to play with them, and they say, we can't play right now. This is a solemn occasion. So he describes what it was like as someone stands with the prisoner while the rest of them chase this dog around a gravel courtyard. They get the dog under control, and he's walking with the man to the gallows. And a curious thing happens. The man sees a puddle, and he steps around it. And Orwell is so struck by that moment because here's a man who's about to be hanged, and yet he's still so living as if avoiding the puddle is something that will prevent him from being uncomfortable later. And so this is what Orwell wrote right after the man avoided the puddle. He says, "It is curious, but till that moment, I had never realized what it means to destroy a healthy, conscious man. When I saw the prisoner step aside to avoid the puddle, I saw the mystery, the unspeakable wrongness of cutting a life short when it is in full tide. This man was not dying. He was alive, just as we were alive. All the organs of his body were working, bowels digesting food, skin renewing itself, nails growing, tissues forming, all toiling away in solemn foolery. His nails would still be growing when he stood on the drop, when he was falling through the air with a tenth of a second to live. His eyes saw the yellow gravel and the gray walls, and his brain still remembered, foresaw, reasoned even about puddles. He and we were a party of men walking together, seeing, hearing, feeling, understanding the same world, and in 2 minutes, with a sudden snap, one of us would be gone, one mind less, one world less." As soon as I finished reading those words, it's 9 a.m. on the dot, which is the very time that Jesus was nailed to the cross. And if you think of what Orwell reminded us of, Jesus was still digesting dinner from the night before, from the Last Supper. Jesus' hair was still growing, his nails were still growing, his body was still working, his cells were still reproducing. He was very much like this man who was to be hanged in Burma. He was very much alive. His mind was reasoning. And yet, on this day, which will be Good Friday of this week, but which we read about today, Jesus will be the one who is taken to the place of execution. And what's so remarkable about this story is all of the people who are doing their own thing, very much like the commander of that British garrison. We might imagine that Pilate is surprised that they come so early and maybe his breakfast was delayed. Those Roman soldiers had probably been held over and weren't even going to be paid overtime, but now they have to go and they have to beat a prisoner early in the morning, unless it was still the night crew and they're just finishing up their work. But they're probably thinking about what they had to do that day. Pilate is thinking about the business of Rome. The elders are thinking about what it means to celebrate a major festival. Everyone is focused on everything except the fact that we have a man who is alive, who very soon will not be alive. And yet, it turns out that this event in Jerusalem will be the event, along with the resurrection, that will change the world. How funny that everyone who is involved in it doesn't notice that God is going to use this thing. It's just one more execution. It's just one more person hanging. It's just one more spectacle that we have to get on with so that we can get back to life as we think it should be. And yet here we are 2,000 years later talking about people like Pontius Pilate. When was the last time you talked about a Roman governor? When was the last time you talked about politics of the ancient Near East? When we do other classes and we talk about the names of kings and other people, they're all some foreign land, some faraway place. And yet this story is so close to our heart because it is the story of Jesus taking on solidarity with people like this man in Burma. It is the story of Jesus taking on solidarity with people who were once living and now are not, about God opening up a possibility to newness of life. When the rabbi at B'nai Tzedek up the street was still here before he moved to Chicago, we were going to try and bring a speaker together. We were going to do a Jewish Christian speaker series, but the guy wanted first-class tickets and we didn't have the money for that. But he deserves them from where he was flying from. But he's a French priest, and he's made it his life's work to go and to visit all the sites in Eastern Europe and the former Soviet Union where they were executing Jews in mass graves, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, Ukraine, and so on, and to make some sort of memorial to people who had never been remembered, to say the prayer memorial for people who had never been prayed for. They'd been forgotten in these ditches. And whenever he speaks, he always tells the people that he's talking to, because they always ask, well, what do we do if that happens again, or what should we do? They go, we're not soldiers, we're not police, what should we do? And he said, each of you has a special task, whatever it is. It could be friends that you have, it could be work that you do, you could cook, you could drive a truck, you could do something. He goes, just know that when the time comes and someone asks you to be part of this machinery of death, you can tell them no. And your no has an enormous moral value. Saying no to a world where people can be disposed of quickly, or they can be buried and forgotten without any call or mediation of justice. He goes, just make sure that the life you're living, you're saying no to participating in the machinery of death, even if it means you're cooking the executioner's lunch. Tell them no. Tell them to go eat somewhere else. Part of what God is doing with the cross is telling the world no. God is saying no to the machinery of death. God is saying no to a bunch of distracted ideas and people that are wondering about their lunch or wondering about their work or wondering about what happens next in the Roman government. God is saying no to all of this so that God can say yes. God can say yes to us in the resurrection. God can say yes to us in the church. God can say yes to us by the power of the Holy Spirit. And part of our retelling of this story is acknowledging our complicity in it, that we are people of violence, that we would be in the crowd saying, crucify him, but also realizing that God disenthralls us from that violence so that we can be people who opt out and become people of true peace. We hope that you'll join us on Friday. We hope that you'll join us on Thursday. We hope that you'll join us on Sunday as well, as we walk through the mystery of this week and draw close to the suffering heart of Jesus and see how it is that God takes the no of the cross and turns it into God's yes for the world. It is a reminder those services will all be at 7 o'clock, and then next Sunday we will have the Easter egg hunt, and we'll have the petting zoo, and we'll have breakfast burritos, so we hope you can join us between services. I also wanted to thank everyone who helped with the St. Patrick's Day event for our youth last week. It was really fun, and we netted out about $2,400, and so thank you for your generosity in supporting them. If you go, oh, I missed that, I think we have a little bit of stew left, and you could have some stew, and you can leave a tip for the youth, but thank you for supporting the youth in their preparations for Japan. And one final thing I wanted to do, I had asked you that, I had told you about one of our new workers at the church, Eric, and I said, if you see Eric, you should say hi to him and invite him to coffee or lunch or whatever you feel comfortable with. And people came up to me afterwards and they said, well, we don't know who Eric is. So Eric, would you just stand for a moment so people, you don't even have to come up, but this is Eric right here. So this is our guy. He's doing a lot of painting around the church, and he's someone that our paths have come together, and by coming together, God has made us a gift to each other as he goes on a journey of wholeness and as we receive the blessing of his work. But this is what it means. The church is the social aspect of the church, connecting with one another, belonging to one another. If you wanted to know what one of my major spiritual projects is for this church, it is simply being a community of spiritual resilience, Many of our social connections in the current time are not resilient, meaning they're very easily broken, they're very easily alienated, they're very suspicious of everybody. And when we have a community of people that are resilient, we're able to welcome people who are different than we are able to create bonds with people. Why? Because we're all living in the shadow of this cross. We're all living in the hope of the empty tomb. It's not some sort of social project that we've decided to undertake. It's the reality of what God's done for us, and God, by the gravity of his love, is calling us to his heart, and by sharing his heart, we find new opportunities to belong to each other. And so I hope as we walk through this week together, we will find new ways to become stronger, more bonded and connected, as we find out how much God truly loves us. Amen.